Religious expression coverage. This is one of Guide One's newest available endorsements on the FaithGuard form. First of all, let's talk about the coverage limit. It's written at $1 million limit as long as, again, you're at $1 million per occurrence limit on your general liability that you're offering your customer through Guide One. There is no aggregate coverage beyond the $1 million, so it's kind of like our directors and officers coverage we spoke about earlier. The coverage limit will be the $1 million per occurrence, and that will be it that's available for the year if they add the religious expression endorsement. It's written on an occurrence basis, and it has defense costs that are written on a separate basis, which I'm going to explain to you how this coverage works. But before I get into the internal limits of the coverage, I want to speak to you about the importance of this coverage and why Guide One has recently made this available to all their agents to add to customers' policies. In today's society, we're all familiar with many of the changing landscapes legally and politically related to personal freedoms, religious freedoms, and some of those have directly affected our core customer, the church and religious-based organizations. Because of that, sometimes churches are now feeling like their religious, closely held beliefs and actions could put them into a situation where they could be accused of discrimination or treating someone unfairly, even though it's a closely held belief in their doctrine and how they operate as a religious organization. Because of that, Guide One, as a leader in the church insurance market, has looked at this recently and decided that they needed to be able to offer some protection for their customers because of this new exposure. So this endorsement has been designed. Right now, it's a flat charge of only $100 per customer for an annualized basis. So the cost is very reasonable, and it's not a difficult application that has to be filled out. It's really just a matter of letting your customer know it's available. If they accept it, it can be added on the FaithGuard package policy for $100. I told you it has $1 million of coverage there. And then outside of the $1 million limit, which is reserved specifically for the settlement or award related to this claim, there are defense costs on a sub-limit. And the reason why this is different from just about all the other coverages I've explained to you in this program is because this is a really new endorsement that is cutting edge. Very few other carriers in the marketplace have anything resembling what Guide One is designed here. So because of that, Guide One has set up the defense costs on a different basis. They have $150,000 per occurrence of defense costs available for any one claim, with a total of $300,000 for the full policy period reserved just for defense costs related to religious expression coverage. Inside that also, there's a $250 per hour rate for any legal defense that they are paying for during this process. And I don't want to make that sound like that is limiting coverage, because if that's compared to the few competitors in the marketplace that have anything like this coverage available, our internal limits are better than most of them. So this is an advantage when I explain that to you. Let me give you some real-life examples so that you'll understand how this coverage could be important for your customers. Let's say we have a nice church, an active church in the community that has great meeting space, and they make their space available, whether it be classrooms, their auditorium, their gymnasium, available to the public to rent. It's a good source of income for them as an organization, and it's a service to provide to their community. Well, potentially a group that doesn't necessarily adhere to the doctrine and religious closely held beliefs of this particular customer decides they want to come in and rent the auditorium for a program on a subject or a social matter that, again, is in strict opposition of what the church holds close in their beliefs. So the church says, I'm sorry, we're not going to allow you to rent this facility. And because of that, that group that wanted to rent the space feels like they have had a mental anguish, they've been discriminated against, and they take action against our church when our church just said, look, this is our property, we don't believe in what you're going to be talking about here, so we don't want you to use our facility. In that situation, this new religious expression coverage would protect our customer for that. Another example where it can come into play, which has become an important issue in society today, are marital issues. Many of our church customers provide marriage services or let people rent out their sanctuaries to have the rite of marriage performed there. Again, this is a closely held religious service. It's considered a sacrament in some of our faiths, and our churches may not necessarily agree with recent Supreme Court rulings, and it could be a situation where there are a couple that may be of a same-sex orientation that wants to be married in their facility. And again, their closely held religious beliefs at this particular church is that they don't believe that that is something they want to have happen in their facility. Again, if a suit were to come in a situation like that, this coverage would protect them. It also could be as simple as somebody says, look, we want to get married here and we're not members, and maybe they're living together, and again, this is a church that's pretty conservative and they're against that, and they deny somebody the right to rent it. Any of those situations where somebody claims like a mental anguish situation and takes action for discrimination by the church, that's where this could come into play. Guide One has lots of resources available that would help give your churches direction on how to make sure that they're following their rules consistently. This can't be a situation where they're picking and choosing people that they will allow to use the facility for these various reasons. It needs to be consistent with their closely held religious beliefs, and in those situations, this coverage is excellent. I would tell you this is something that separates us from the competition greatly, and you should really leverage this when you're presenting. Make this available to even the smallest congregations to let them know, because it really resonates in today's world, and it's something that I'm proud to work with an organization, Guide One, that took the time to be a leader and design this coverage when it was needed most.